In the 1850s, across 4 continents separated by oceans that took months to cross, government buildings began appearing with the same architectural signature. The same dome proportions. The same column spacing. The same entrance symmetry. Official history attributes this to neoclassical revival, a shared aesthetic movement that spread through architectural journals and European training. Architects studied the same classical precedents, absorbed the same principles, and independently arrived at similar solutions. But the buildings weren't just similar in style. They were similar in dimension. A courthouse built in Melbourne in 1857 shares the same floor plan ratio as one constructed in Toronto in 1856. Both use identical column diameter to height ratios. Both position their central rotundas at precisely the same proportion of total building depth. The architectural journals of the period show sketches and theories, but they don't show floor plans distributed globally with construction specifications. And they don't explain the timing. Between 1820 and 1870, administrative buildings with nearly identical structural layouts appeared in cities across Australia, Canada, the United States, and South Africa. Regions with vastly different populations, resources, and governance needs. The scale matched the design, not the local demand. This is a documentary exploration of architectural patterns that emerged simultaneously across disconnected regions, and the timing, scale, and administrative systems that appeared alongside them. We're not making claims about hidden history. We're examining buildings that still stand, records that still exist, and a pattern that has invited reinterpretation under the name Tartaria, a term now used by some to describe a framework of inherited infrastructure rather than a distinct civilization. What we present here are observations. The conclusions remain open. In 1827, the city of Albany, New York, completed a statehouse designed to serve a population of roughly 16,000 people. The building could accommodate administrative functions for a city 5 times that size. Its marble-columned interior featured vaulted ceilings 40 feet high. Its courtrooms were sized for proceedings involving hundreds of participants. Its document storage hall stretched across 12,000 square feet, designed with shelving capacity that wouldn't be filled for decades. Albany wasn't an outlier. Across the northeastern United States, county courthouses built in the 1830s and 1840s followed the same pattern. Monumental structures in towns with populations barely reaching 4 figures. The buildings shared more than ambition. They shared architectural grammar. The same pilaster placement. The same entryway proportions. The same internal circulation logic. And that grammar appeared elsewhere. In 1858, the city of Christchurch, New Zealand, erected a provincial council building with a floor plan nearly identical to a state house constructed in Richmond, Virginia, 4 years earlier. Neither architect had visited the other's region. Neither had access to the other's technical drawings. Yet both buildings used the same structural base system, the same roof pitch angles, and the same relationship between corridor width and office depth. The similarities extended to materials. Granite ashlar blocks, cut to uniform dimensions, appeared in government buildings from Cape Town to Ontario. The blocks weren't quarried locally, they were shipped. Trade records show stone moving across hemispheres in quantities that exceeded immediate construction needs, often arriving before the buildings themselves were publicly announced. The infrastructure required to move, dress, and install these materials was already in place. That's what makes the timeline difficult to reconcile. In 1834, the British Colonial Office completed construction on administrative centres in 3 cities: Perth, Melbourne, and Sydney. All 3 used the same modular floor plan. All 3 specified the same window-to-wall ratios. And all 3 were completed within a 16-month span, despite being separated by thousands of miles of coastline and having no shared construction workforce. The plans weren't sent from London. Colonial archives contain budget approvals and material allocations, but the architectural drawings themselves appear in regional records with no clear origin documentation. The buildings simply went up, efficiently, uniformly, and on schedule. The pattern wasn't limited to British colonies. In the United States, the federal government's Public Buildings Act of 1836 initiated a wave of custom house and courthouse construction across 30 cities. The buildings, completed between 1837 and 1842, shared load-bearing wall thicknesses, door header heights, and staircase geometries with a consistency that implied a central template. No such template exists in the National Archives. What does exist are the buildings, and they all function the same way. A custom house in Portland, Maine has the same internal layout as one in Savannah, Georgia. Both feature central atriums surrounded by identical office suites. Both use the same filing system architecture. Rooms designed with built-in shelving sized to specific document dimensions that weren't standardized by the federal government until 12 years after construction began. The systems anticipated the standards. This becomes more pronounced when examining infrastructure built in the same period. Between 1825 and 1850, canal systems, railway terminals, and grain storage facilities were constructed across North America and Europe with load capacities that exceeded contemporary shipping volumes by significant margins. These weren't expansions of existing systems. They were new installations, built to scales that only became necessary decades later. The administrative buildings matched that scale. And they arrived in the same narrow window: courthouses, customs halls, legislative chambers. All designed with ceiling heights, wall thicknesses, and structural redundancies that far exceeded the functional needs of the populations they served, but matched each other across continents. Some researchers have interpreted this as evidence of an inherited building stock, structures from an earlier, more globally integrated system that were repurposed and rebranded as new construction during the 19th century. Others see it as a natural result of colonial administration and shared European training among a small network of architects. Both interpretations require explaining the same fact. The buildings exist, and they continue to function in ways their official construction dates struggle to fully account for. The Erie Canal opened in 1825, connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean through 363 miles of excavated waterway. The official narrative describes it as an ambitious infrastructure project, engineered to facilitate westward expansion and commercial trade. And it did both. But the scale of the canal's construction raises a specific question about timing. The lock systems were designed to handle cargo volumes that didn't exist yet. In 1825, the population of Buffalo stood at roughly 2,400 people. The canal's western terminus featured stone lock chambers capable of processing 200-ton freight barges, vessels that wouldn't be commercially viable in the region for another 15 years. The infrastructure was built for a demand that hadn't arrived. And it wasn't built experimentally. The Erie Canal's 36 stone locks were constructed with uniform dimensions, 90 feet long, 15 feet wide, with limestone blocks cut to tolerances of less than half an inch. The precision implied experienced engineering and existing quarrying capacity. Yet no comparable canal system had been built in North America prior to 1825. The skills appeared fully formed. So did the administrative apparatus to manage them. Within 2 years of the canal's completion, the state of New York had established way stations, toll collection offices, and maintenance depots at intervals along the route, each housed in nearly identical stone buildings with the same floor plans, the same fenestration patterns, and the same basement storage vaults. These weren't temporary structures. They were permanent installations, built as if the canal system had been operating for decades. The same pattern emerged in Britain. Between 1830 and 1850, the British railway network expanded from 100 miles of track to over 6,000. The stations constructed during this period shared a remarkable consistency. Whether in Manchester, Birmingham, or Edinburgh, the terminal buildings followed a template: vaulted train sheds spanning 100 to 150 feet, supported by cast iron ribs with identical cross-sectional profiles. The iron came from different foundries, but the specifications matched. Railway companies were nominally independent, yet their infrastructure adhered to the same load-bearing standards, the same platform heights, and the same gauge width, decisions that required coordination across competing entities who had no formal mechanism for such alignment. The standardization preceded the regulatory framework that would later enforce it, and it extended beyond the railways themselves. In 1838, grain elevators began appearing in port cities along the Great Lakes. Buffalo, Chicago, Milwaukee. These were not traditional granaries. They were vertical storage systems, built with steam-powered conveyor mechanisms capable of loading and unloading bulk grain at rates that far exceeded the shipping capacity available at the time. The first grain elevator in Buffalo, completed in 1843, could process 1,000 bushels per hour. The city's commercial grain traffic in 1843 averaged 200 bushels per hour. The infrastructure was built for a future demand, but it was built with the confidence of a known outcome. The same principle applied to urban water systems. In the 1840s, cities across the United States and Britain began installing pressurized water distribution networks with cast-iron pipe systems. The pipes were manufactured to standardized diameters: 4-inch, 6-inch, 12-inch, 24-inch. These sizes became industry norms, but they were used before any industry-wide standards organization existed. Philadelphia's Fairmount Waterworks, completed in 1815, distributed water through a grid designed to serve a population of 200,000. The city's population in 1815 was 112,000. The system didn't expand incrementally. It was installed at full scale with reservoir capacities and pumping stations sized for a demand 2 decades away. London followed a similar trajectory. The Metropolitan Commission of Sewers, established in 1848, oversaw the construction of sewer tunnels beneath the city with load capacities that wouldn't be fully utilized until the 1880s. The tunnels weren't built in stages. They were excavated as complete networks, with junction points and overflow systems that assumed a level of urban density London hadn't yet achieved. The infrastructure anticipated growth with precision, and it did so across multiple cities simultaneously. Between 1840 and 1860, sewer systems with nearly identical engineering principles were installed in New York, Paris, Hamburg, and Melbourne, cities with vastly different governance structures and no formal engineering exchange agreements. The technical knowledge moved faster than the official channels could account for. This synchronization extended to administrative systems. In 1837, the British government implemented the Civil Registration Act, establishing a uniform system for recording births, marriages, and deaths across England and Wales. The system required local registrars to maintain records in standardized ledger formats, filed in district offices built to accommodate the storage. Those offices already existed. In towns across England, registry buildings constructed between 1820 and 1835, before the Civil Registration Act was passed, featured archive rooms with shelving designed to hold the exact ledger dimensions the 1837 law would later mandate. The storage came before the requirement. The same phenomenon appeared in the United States. County courthouses built in the 1830s included deed record vaults with fireproofing, humidity control, and shelving systems sized for document formats that wouldn't be standardized by state governments until the 1850s. The architecture knew what was coming, or it inherited a system that had already been in place. In Canada, the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, completed in 1866, were designed with legislative chambers sized for a bicameral system serving a unified confederation of provinces, a political structure that didn't legally exist until July 1, 1867. The building was ready before the government it housed was formed. This wasn't visionary planning. It was infrastructure built to specifications that assumed continuity. Across North America, Europe, and the British colonies, the administrative and civil infrastructure of the mid-19th century emerged with a level of uniformity that transcended regional governance. The systems didn't evolve locally and then converge. They appeared synchronized, as if rolling out from a common blueprint. Whether that blueprint represents a shared colonial template, an inherited framework from an earlier administrative period, or the remnant of a more globally integrated system now labeled Tartaria, the infrastructure itself remains consistent. The buildings still stand, the systems still function, and the timing still compresses in ways that resist easy explanation. The term Tartaria originates in European cartography. From the 15th through the 18th centuries, maps labeled the vast interior of Eurasia as Tartary, a catch-all designation for regions beyond direct European knowledge. It wasn't a unified empire. It was a geographic placeholder, applied to lands inhabited by Turkic, Mongolic, and other Central Asian peoples. By the mid-19th century, the term had faded from official use, but the buildings remained. In recent years, Tartaria has been reinterpreted, not as a specific nation-state, but as a framework for examining architectural and infrastructural patterns that appear globally synchronized during a narrow historical window. For some, it represents inherited remnants of an earlier, more advanced civilization. For others, it's a lens for questioning the completeness of 19th-century construction narratives. The term itself is less important than the observations it organizes. Three interpretive models have emerged. The first holds that the uniformity of government buildings, railways, and civic infrastructure reflects an inherited building stock. Structures that predated the 19th century and were repurposed, rebranded, or administratively absorbed during a period of geopolitical reorganization. Proponents of this view point to the architectural precision, material consistency, and synchronous appearance of these systems as evidence of continuity rather than rapid new construction. The second model attributes the patterns to colonial coordination and European architectural training. Shared design principles, centralized governance, and the global reach of the British Empire created conditions for standardized infrastructure. In this view, the buildings are exactly what their construction records claim, products of 19th century industrial capacity, built quickly through organized labor and emerging technologies. The third model suggests a hybrid, that localized construction in the 1800s followed templates, specifications, and material standards inherited from earlier administrative periods, whether Ottoman, Qing, Mughal, or other large-scale governance systems whose physical infrastructure outlasted their political collapse. Each interpretation engages the same evidence, and none resolve the timing entirely. Consider again the year 1816. It's remembered climatically as the year without a summer, a period of global crop failure following the eruption of Mount Tambora. But 1816 also marks a turning point in institutional record-keeping. Census systems, civil registries, and property ledgers began appearing with new thoroughness across Europe and North America. The records don't just document people. They document systems already in place. Property deeds filed in 1817 reference building plots and infrastructure established decades earlier, but with no prior written record. Canal systems appear in tax documents as existing assets, their construction dates inferred retroactively. Government buildings are assessed for value in ledgers that provide no construction details. The administrative continuity implies physical continuity, and physical continuity requires material evidence. That evidence exists in the structures still standing: courthouses with capacities mismatched to their towns, rail terminals built for traffic that hadn't arrived, and administrative buildings sharing design logic across hemispheres. Whether these represent rapid 19th century construction, inherited infrastructure, or a combination of both, the pattern invites examination beyond the accepted timelines. Tartaria in this context is not a claim. It's a placeholder, a way of naming the gap between what the buildings suggest and what the records confirm. The reinterpretation doesn't require rejecting documented history. It requires holding space for the possibility that some infrastructure attributed to the 1800s may have originated earlier, been adapted, or inherited from systems whose administrative traces were reorganized during periods of political transition. This is not about lost civilizations. It's about construction timelines, material logistics, and architectural synchronization that occurred faster and more uniformly than isolated regional projects typically allow. The buildings themselves are not mysterious. They are accessible, measurable, and documented. What remains unresolved is the mechanism by which such uniformity emerged across disconnected regions within such a compressed timeframe, and whether that mechanism has been fully captured by existing historical narratives. Some will see these observations as indicative of hidden complexity in 19th century development. Others will see them as fragments of an earlier global infrastructure network. Still others will view them as natural outcomes of imperial coordination and shared technical knowledge. All three perspectives coexist in the same physical landscape. The courthouses still anchor their town squares. The railway stations still anchor their cities. The administrative buildings still house the functions they were allegedly built to serve. And across 4 continents, they continue to share the same proportions, the same materials, and the same quiet suggestion that their origins may be less straightforward than their plaques indicate.